So just wanted to thank everybody for joining us. This is the strawberry education section for the conference. First, we've got Aaron Cato, and he is the extension agent for the University of Arkansas, and he will be talking about managing pests in strawberries, comparing the effectiveness of hoop, air blast, and drone sprayers, and notes on tarnished plant bug management.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So yeah, my name's Aaron. I'm a IPM or pest management specialist at the University of Arkansas. I like to say I'm an entomologist, but I do a lot of work on disease as well. So they hired me on to cover all diseases and insects for all food crops, basically, especially crops in Arkansas. So vegetables, fruits. So I wear a lot of hats. And so you probably heard me, if you're in the Caneberry session yesterday, I think I'll be there later talking about nematodes. And one thing I think that kind of brings all that together is this idea of, spraying correctly when y'all do make pesticide applications. And so I did a lot of work in like sampler type things. And so like how fast you're walking, how much area you're taking. There's a lot that goes into, figuring out what's in your field. You can go out there and say, well, I saw 5 plant bugs. But what does that mean? You saw 5 plant bugs on 5 plants. You saw 5 plant bugs in 2 minutes. And so there's a lot of stuff I think that we take for granted. And with sprayers, I think that's the same way. You talk to somebody, they tell you, well, I put out Cap 10 and switch, and then I put out Cap 10 Lunar Sensation, then I swapped over to something else. And you're like, okay, well, you should be in good control on things like anthracnose. But then you go out in the field and there's just disease everywhere. And so there's a lot more that goes into it than using the right products. Sometimes it's making sure you're using acceptable amounts of volume or your gallons per acre, making sure that you're actually calibrated and getting the right amount of pesticide that you think out there. If you change a half a mile an hour, you could be over applying or under applying enough that you increase your pressure. So there's a lot that goes into it. And one thing that we started looking at is just, types of sprayers. I think I gave a talk here 2 years ago about, when do you stop spraying for fungicides? We've always heard this idea of, gray mold, it only infects flowers. It'll affect a damaged berry that you're not going to sell, but it mainly infects flowers. But when do you stop? And so one question that y'all asked me while I was here is, what about these air blast sprayers that a lot of people are using? Is it making anthracnose worse? How well is it covering? And I would say in the last couple of years, we've had a lot more growers in Arkansas swap to these Canon sprayers that, they're pretty cheap for what you're getting and what you're actually going to spray. And so they'll spray 3 rows at a time and come down the other side and spray back across those 3 rows. But my question to them is always, how does that middle row differ since it's not directly being applied to? And so we're starting up some research now trying to look into comparing that to a hoop sprayer that's going over the top. And so I'm going to share some preliminary research on that with y'all today. And then the other thing that we get big questions about, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have, questions about, are drone sprayers. There's a lot of specialty crops where drones promise some type of efficiency gain, cheaper labor, it's going to be quicker, stuff like that. And I would say that strawberries are pretty well set up, just thinking about what they would do a good job. If you ask me about grapes, I would say, good luck getting through the canopy. Blackberries, maybe good luck. But then you start thinking about cucurbits like pumpkins or watermelons and maybe strawberries, and it's a pretty, not too tall of a canopy, something you can move around. So maybe it's something we can work with. And so we set up a trial where we're going to compare a hoop sprayer, an air blast sprayer, and a drone sprayer just to kind of see some baseline data. And so all I have today, and I'll show it to you in a second, is just the first application. We planted this stuff in the spring. We're going through the same stuff y'all are. Our plants came in with Neop on them. We've sprayed the crap out of them with Thiram, a little bit of some other stuff, or like a switch. It's a research trial, so we'll put a little extra more than we should, but we're not going to eat it and things like that. So I'll get kind of into that. I'm kind of giving you a long intro since we're a little early on starting, but no worries on that. But I'm working with my collaborator, Jason Davis. He's our agriculture technology specialist. And the guy works a little bit on everything, but sprayers is like his bread and butter. So he's the person that calibrates for people around the whole state. And then he also does a ton of work with drones. And just to be forward, we're not allowed to have drones, basically. We go through a lot of the same stuff that the USDA does. So basically, if you go to buy a drone in the United States, it's probably going to be a DJI. That's what most people are using. Most of our collaborators are using, or our stakeholders, and we're not allowed to work with them. And so I'll show you data from a DJI drone, but I don't own the drone. or nothing. It was just a guy that came and helped out and used his drone, and we got data from it, so whatever he put out. But it's a big limitation for us because that's what our applicators are using, because it's what they can most easily get. And so some of the more American-made stuff needs to really become more accessible for us to use, is what I would say. So does anybody know what's going on in this picture right here? I'm sure y'all have seen it, or y'all wouldn't have come and asked me to give a talk on it. I came and gave a talk in Alabama on this 2 years ago. I think they were having a bit of issues. I get a call from a guy in south of Auburn every single year telling me that he has big-time plant bug issues. And so this what's going on here. This is from a farm in 2022, I believe, in the spring. This guy had sprayed Transform 3 times, bifenthrin twice, and put out some insect growth regulators, and he was still getting this injury. So just one of those cases. And I'm hoping you can look at the fruit closely from this picture. I think it looks better in a field view than looking closely at the fruit. But if you notice, almost every single fruit has black lesions on it, right? This guy had sprayed Switch Plus Cap 10, he'd sprayed Luna Sensation, Cap 10 Elevate, Cap 10 Switch, Cap 10 Luna Sensation. That was his spray schedule before I came out. And I would say 60 to 75% of the fruit were covered up with anthracnose. So it wasn't what he was using, and the other instance is the same exact issue. It's how the insecticide is actually, or the pesticides and insecticide and fungicides actually getting out of the plants. Look great. I mean, the guy knows how to grow plants, but every year he gets to this point, and there's just not much good fruit to sell once we start getting a little bit of rainfall in Arkansas. And so, our observations have been that we have trouble controlling pests in Arkansas. I think we have high pressure situations, and so these are just the same pictures. We get a ton of rainfall in March and then into April, right when you don't want it. Every once in a while we'll have a drought, and it's just the best strawberries you can imagine, but we get a bunch of rain. The other thing we get is some years it's just hot early, and I'm assuming all y'all got hot early this year, and that's probably why you're dealing with plant bugs, because when you get hot early, they come on a little earlier, get through a generation, they show up earlier in your strawberries. So we start questioning what is the driving factor for some of our issues. We know that we have weather issues, obviously, but that's what we're growing in. That's just what's going to go on. But, we're timing our fungicides correctly a lot, but we're still getting this high prevalence disease. Is it a perfect mix of wind, rain, and heat during this, sensitive timings? Maybe, but we've seen other times where, like the one last year, or this picture right here, it really didn't start to rain till about a week or two before this. So if you're getting good fungicides on and you're just getting into your heavy rains, I don't know that you see anthracnose like that. Now, if you tell me it rained for 3 weeks straight, the last 3 weeks, and you're into that, sometimes that happens. Even if you have good fungicides out, the pressure's just perfect. We're talking about decreased sensitivity insecticides, so thinking about the plant bug situation we had. I don't think so. I've worked in cotton and a lot. I'm from Mississippi County, Arkansas, and Transform's a really good cotton product. And the other product he was using is the equivalent to Diamond, and I always forget the name of it, but I've got it in my table later. But it's an insect growth regulator. Diamond Transform, that is a Cadillac approach to plant bug suppression in cotton. And so I think it's Ryman transforming strawberries, what I would say is the Cadillac approach. Well, this is what he had after the Cadillac approach, so what's going on there? And so I think both of these situations, it's about the application themselves. And so they're paying the money to put it out there, but it's how many corners are being cut on the way to actually getting it out there. And so we've done a little digging in strawberry. I would say that if you went to the information technology session or precision ag, they're all going to blow me out of the water. I'm just an entomologist. I do a lot of field research on efficacy trials, and then we're trying to integrate some different changes in our equipment and see what the differences we get are. And so here we were just looking at a broadcast sprayer like you would buy to spray your pasture or something like that, compared to a hoop sprayer. And so I think we had our boom sprayer at 50 GPA, and then this one ended up being like 100. And so there's some differences there just from the gallonage, but I would really wonder how slow you got to drive to get that to more than 50 GPA. That was driving pretty slow. This was driving much faster with 5 nozzles on one row, and so you're going to get a lot of water there, which is what we want. But these ones where we have some yellow and some black, those are rolled up card trying to simulate spraying around the outside of a berry, right? I really would question whether or not you're going to get good control on that stuff there on the left. We were getting well around 10% coverage, and we would say anything 15 plus is really 15% coverage is what you want to shoot for. Now, we had decent leaf coverage on the tops of the leaves, of course, but we just really didn't get much with that boom sprayer. So we did this just as a quick demonstration, and we replicated it and all that just to kind of show you. But we're not getting great coverage, just kind of taking one step down on the equipment you're using. And what we know from all the research that's been done is that your efficacy and control, your suppression, that's a function of the coverage you get. And so if you start cutting out what coverage you get, you're going to start seeing slippage in what you're doing. It's going to be similar. You're going to think it's resistance out there. You're like, I don't know what's going on. And it could just be your coverage. And there's a lot going on when you're calibrating sprayers. Nozzles don't last forever. If you have ceramic tips, they're going to last a little longer. But if you have plastic or even stainless steel, they will eventually start to give you different gallonage than what they're promising. So there's a lot to think about with your sprayer output. There's a lot of hands involved. So if you get a new sprayer, does he fully understand how large your tank is, how much you can spray, what nozzles, all the things like that. There's a lot of questions and things you can change up to kind of make it that can make the application poorer or more improve it. But today I'm just going to talk about sprayer type. I have a whole thing that we give to the Mid-American strawberry growers about calibrating strawberry sprayers or stuff like that. But we're going to talk about sprayer type, and then we'll get into plant bugs. And so generally in the Southeast, we're dealing with two types of sprayers. And I put that picture on the top left. That's California, right? Blower sprayers are the way to go. All their research says it. If you can get air assist in your sprayers, you're going to get a lot better efficacy on the diseases that you're controlling. For them, it's mainly botrytis or gray mold, but also plant bugs. But that's an expensive rig, and that's really good GPS, planting. Where I'm at, you would be very lucky to have ground where you can plant that straight, is what I'm going to say. There's a lot of hills involved and a little bit of toe one way or the other. And so generally what we're dealing with is some type of hoop sprayer. It could be a setup where there's multiple. That's a broadcast sprayer. We have some growers spraying that way, or one of these Canon type sprayers that the people are using. So that's generally what we're dealing with. Most of the research that's been done showing efficacy has been on either hoop sprayers or it's been on these very, very high-tech air assist directed sprayers where they're hitting both sides of every single row. And usually they're doing really high GPAs with that. Not on these types of air blast sprayers. There's been very little research done on those in strawberries themselves. So the questions we have, is like how many rows are you covering with those things? We see in Arkansas people anywhere from 3 to 4 rows. People are spraying across, then come in the backside. There's no one spraying one way in Arkansas with them. They usually come around the backside with it. Does it influence anthracnose? That was the question y'all asked me, and I think I asked Phil to answer. And whether or not that moving droplets are spreading around things. And my assumption would be that there's fungicide in the water that you're spraying, so maybe it would kill the spores that are moving, but we don't know. And how does that coverage compare to things like boom type sprayers? We're just not really 100% sure. And then, even if you're using some type of hoop or boom, like what's the acceptable gallonage? I would say 80 GPA plus. So if you're putting out 80 gallons of total solution per acre, I think you're in the right track. But we shoot for more than 100 when we're getting into the springtime. I think that's what you really have to do to get into the crown, especially with things like Neop to try to get good suppression. So what about drone sprayers? RPAAS is the fancy way to say it, the remote aerial applicator systems. It's new options. I live and work around a lot of rice, and so we have tons and tons of aerial applications going out in Arkansas. If you're on 40 heading from Little Rock to Memphis, around Lone Oak area, you can see 5 planes in the air at one time in the right times in the year. So we have tons of aerial applicators already. And so there's a lot of industry around us. There's a lot of people coming out of Jonesboro, Arkansas, selling these drones or doing custom applications. So we have a lot of interest here or there, and I know that there's interest across the country too. But I would say that I could find 10 custom applicator companies between Little Rock and Jonesboro right now that would come out and spray for me if I wanted them to, or if you had the money, or you could find one to spray or to pay. And that's mostly because of our rice. And then also they're spraying duck holes and things like that. And so there's a big industry out there. So there's a lot of work they're trying to do in the spring before rice comes up. They're willing to come spray strawberries. They're willing to spray in the certain times of the summer, spray watermelons and things like that. So we have a lot of promise. We have a lot of salesmen selling growers. Instead of buying an air blast or buying a hoop sprayer, you can buy a drone. The promises of them is they won't run up the field. I know all of y'all have had times where it's raining, you need to spray, but if you drive through there, you're looking at really messing up your operation, and especially the case in some of our smaller growers that are doing U-pick operations. It's more similar to an air blast application, I would say, because the promise is like this downwash where the air is going to blow the pesticide material around. I think when you compare it to air blast, it's never better because you're getting a directed right at the canopy blast. But comparing to like a hoop sprayer, maybe there's something to be said for this downwash. And then the improved production efficiencies. I guess the idea is labor and time. You have one person doing it, but that's really a function of gallonage. At 5 gallons per acre or 10, I think it's improved efficiencies. But once you start going higher than that, these things have a 12-gallon tank is what that, this is the T50 that the guy sprayed with. A 12-gallon tank's not going to go very far at 100 gallons per acre, right? It's a lot of refilling. So the potential downsides, and I'm not going to tell you one way or the other because I don't know yet. We've done one trial with this so far. So limited products due to aerial application. So Captain got some changes. I know when I haven't looked too deeply into the Cap-10 side of it for strawberries, but I don't think in California they can spray with an airplane anymore with Cap-10. So if it's banned from an airplane, it's banned from a drone. Limited times you can apply. If above 10 miles per hour wind, a lot of times they'll say no aerial applications. That's in Arkansas, that's about half the time. Very expensive. I think this was like a $35,000 or $40,000 drone. And then you start talking about bells and whistles with software. Small water tanks, more refilling, limited spray volume. Where is your spray material going? I watch these things spray and then I say into the ethosphere. I don't know. You just see that stuff gone. And so how much of that is what you needed to be on the plants? And what's the lifespan of the software? We have a drone sitting in our lab that the guy bought 5 years ago. He said is obsolete. I don't know what that means. Jason Davis has a T20 that he said it wouldn't be worth using. I mean, that's not that very much of old of a drone. I mean, y'all probably have sprayers that you inherited, right? I mean, this stuff can go pretty quick, and so I don't know if that's going to change in the future, but it's what we're dealing with right now. And so this is just an example of what you're seeing with the downwash, and hopefully you can see the spray material. It sometimes can get washed out, but this is at our trial that I'm going to show some data from, but you can kind of see it looks like it's getting pretty good coverage, and that's what our impression was when we saw this. And I think this is the run with the least amount of wind that we had, but it was not a very windy day when we sprayed this. I think we were at 3 to 6 miles per hour, and I think most of y'all would say that is a good day to spray, and we would have as well. So we'll talk a little bit about this trial. So we had it set up with, we're supposed to do 3 rows, and then we asked for help from our grower. He had a 4-row set up, and we had a hurricane coming in, and he came real quick and helped us pull these beds at a research station about 5 miles from his operation, or 2 miles. And so we got a 4th row, and we may rip it out yet, we don't know. But we planted down 3 rows. We had to leave a lot of space because of drift issues, and we'd love to put everything closer to each other, but drones drift, and we're going to try to do this with fungicides this spring to actually look at efficacy. But we had 4 replications of all the treatments that we're going to show you. There are 3-row plots, so this would be 1 plot. It's 25 plants, so 75 plants in a plot. It's a pretty large plot for strawberry. It gets really expensive. And within those plots, we run these 2 rail systems. And so inside the rail, we'll have 3 inches width and 3 foot of a spray tape. And so basically, every single application got 3 of those that looked at it that are perpendicular to the row to kind of see stuff moving across, and then parallel within the row with a little bit of overlap of the leaves to try to make sure we can, think about stuff underneath. I think I did all that. This is just on a preliminary day. The guy who helped us out with this was Max Drone Service. The guy's name is Max. He's out of North Arkansas, and I think he sells and fixes and does our custom applications. But basically, we did a simulated fall fungicide application. So this was on November 15th, and so you can see about how big our plants got by November 15th. I think we planted them I don't have it on there, September 23rd or September 25th when we planted them, which is pretty on brand for Arkansas. We sprayed about 10 foot with the drone. We had winds between 3 to 6 miles per hour. We had a thing that tracked the wind as we went in a video the whole time we sprayed, so we can kind of see when the gusts were. Never got above 6 miles an hour, which in Arkansas is still, basically. Instead of an air blast sprayer, we were really worried about drifts. We used a steel blower sprayer with a built-in pump to make sure it was a steady flow rate, and so I'll show you a video of that. And then instead of a hoop sprayer, because it was very muddy out there, we just took what we normally spray all our trials with, which is a 2-nozzle boom at an angle and then come back down the other side, so it simulates 4 nozzles on 1 row, kind of like a hoop sprayer. The drone sprayer, the highest that we could ever think of getting was 40 gallons per acre. This guy's set up to this. Nobody else is. He has 2 booms on the sprayer, so he can do this. 20 gallons per acre is probably the highest you'll ever talk somebody into doing for you, and then 10 gallons per acre. And then for the air blast and the hoop, we wanted to do more realistic with what people do, so we did 160 in comparison. So you'll see, yeah, like we got better coverage with air blast and hoop, but we did push more water. But I'll tell you is that it was going to be a lot quicker to spray with the air blast and the hoop than to ever try to get that drone sprayer to do up to 80. You would have to do twice as much time, so you're looking at like 4 times the amount of time. This is the equipment we use to look at these things, and so basically there's a 33 millimeter camera in here. You feed it through, and it takes a picture every 33 millimeters, or about 1.3 or 4 inches. And so you get a picture all the way down that 3 foot, and you end up getting all these small data points, and it'll tell you across a 3 foot area how much variation you're getting in that. So it gives you a really good picture of how much variation is present in your applications. Here's the steel blower sprayer across the 3 rows. So we walk down both sides. You can see the one side's hit directly, the middle's getting a pretty good amount, and this is kind of what a air blast application is going to look like when you do it as well. I would say we're losing less product here than a typical air blast would probably lose. And then here's just the boom sprayer we use, and so it's a simulated hoop sprayer. And so you can see, I think of all 3 of them, looking at the video, that's the one that looked least impressive to us. But you tell me in the data which one, the directed application, which one is better. So here's the first bit, and like I said, it's still preliminary. We're still looking at stats on it. There's like 18,000 data points to this because of 4 replications, 3 sub-reps per replication, and then there's down a 3 foot, we took a picture every 1.4 inches. So every one of those is the data points. It takes forever to look at, but what I want you to look at though is that, mean percent coverage. This is what coverage you would expect when you put that out, right? Boom at 100 gallons per acre, those things were pretty much all covered. It didn't look like it was that good, but it really covered those tapes. 60 gallons per acre, we see a step down, but I would say even at 60 in a fall application, way good coverage. That's better than you would hope for. And so when the plant canopies are opened up, you get good coverage. And we knew that already in fall applications. People do 40 or 50 gallons per acre and do a really good job. Air blast is just a stair step down, exact same amount of water, but as you can see in the photos, some of it's flying off into the ether some of it's hitting in between the rows. Even though we calibrate for the whole area instead of just the bed, you still end up with stuff everywhere. A lot more variation too. You can kind of see that with how long the standard error bars are. But we'll look at the stats and see if any of this actually separates once we do more reps of it, or more applications of it. But you can see a stair step down from 100 to 60. And then the drone, I know it's 10 gallons per acre, but 10 to 20, I would say neither of those are really the level you're shooting for. So that's 15% coverage. I would say that's the bare minimum. And this is going to be a pretty open canopy in the fall. It's not going to be like trying to cover berries in the spring. So mean percent coverage, the drone looked really good in person. We were sitting out there thinking, man, this looks great. And then we looked at the data, and not as great as we thought it was going to be honest. Looking at pattern variation, so sometimes we'd go out there with the drone and we'd see this. And this is almost 100%, right, for a small area. So that would be a zoomed up picture of 1.4 inches by 3 inches. That's what the pictures that are being taken. And then sometimes you would just barely see a dot here. So I took these both from the exact same run. And so what we looked at was within the reels that are being looked at, what's the variation? And I really want you to look at the drone there. That this is all compared to 0, I think is kind of how it goes. But huge amounts of variation in the drone. Anytime the wind went from 3 to 5 miles an hour, you can just see it fly way out into the field. And hopefully, if you're spraying a whole field, you're going to get a lot of that onto your other rows. But, my question is going to be are there spots that are being missed when that little bitty gust of wind hits? Or maybe if you can find the stillest morning, or maybe a temperature inversion or something, maybe it'll go in there. I don't know. Air blast, there's some variation out there, but it was just a bit of a stair step above the boom, so it wasn't too bad. But we definitely had some good variation in the air blast compared to the boom sprayer. But you would expect that. We're spraying directed into the plants versus spraying across plants. Then looking at the percent coverage, we wanted to look just at that middle row, and that's partially why we're doing the perpendicular and the parallels. And we tried to make sure we sprayed all those middle rows. And so where are we getting differences depending on which rows they were on? And so if I remind you in the air blast, we're 50 to 60% coverage, right? And we had more in 100 than the 60. And then when we look at just the middle row, 50% in both of them. So we were getting less coverage overall in that middle row compared to the outside. So now you're asking yourself, I'm putting out 12 ounces of switch. You're getting more in your 2 rows you're spraying beside, and that middle row is not getting as much switch as the others. I mean, that's just what we're seeing here. We're also not seeing any benefit from a step up in volume in that middle row. And so it'll be interesting to look at this over several different applications, see what we see. But you can see in the drone, it's kind of the same. We get the stair step, and it's really a similar picture. But the striking thing to me was that air blast, and that's why we did the 3-row approach. We wanted to see what we weren't capturing in that middle row. So in conclusion, we're still waiting to see data when the canopy fills in. You can see this was probably one of our smaller plant plots because we had 4 reps, and probably a lot like y'all, we had 1,000 plants to plant. We had all the trays for it, and we were selective. And as by the time we got to the 4th rep, the plants weren't quite as big, and they had a little bit more Neop on them. And we cleaned it up, but they're still struggling a little bit on the back end. So that's probably one of those plots. But the boom sprayer by far away looked the best. I mean, I don't want to say that we expected that, but whenever you're blowing material straight into the plants, I'm expecting that to get the best coverage. It was still the least impressive. I was looking at it thinking, man, we're barely putting any water out. It doesn't look right. And then you look at the data, and it's like, yep, that's exactly what you hope to see. Large amounts of variation in the drone and the air blast. My question is going to keep saying, like, what happens when you miss covering one plant? What we know with like anthracnose and gray mold is it can kind of be like a train speeding up. If you allow it to get going, it's not going to get stopped real easily. And so that's what we really worry about with those little gusts of wind or spots that you're missing. You really cover 2 plants here, but you miss a plant there. Are you going to have pockets of disease that start to move around in your field? And it kind of worries us, but we're not really sure yet if that's going to be the case. We're hopeful to be able to put out some fungicide applications in sequence and see what we get from that. And then just those middle rows, if you're adding some production efficiency, is it hurting you on the back end? And so we think that could be the case. And the plant bug picture I showed you, that guy was using an air blast. And we think there's some spots where those plant bugs were just hiding out and not being hit when I think he was actually skipping 2 rows. And so I think that was what was going on there. The other picture I showed you, that guy was using a pump sprayer for 4 acres. That's why he wasn't getting any coverage, because best case scenario, I think he was getting like 2 gallons per acre of water. So what's the cheapest option? If you don't have a hoop sprayer, we built this sprayer here. We started with this idea that you have a boom sprayer sitting around somewhere. This one was one that was sitting at a research station no one was using. I think we spent $140 to turn it into a strawberry sprayer. And so that was the data I showed you in the beginning. That's the coverage that thing's getting. So if you're interested in doing that, Ryan is my program associate. He's here at the AWP conference, but we put a YouTube video up, all the parts that we bought, how to build it yourself. We have a fact sheet as well. And so it's the simplest thing. You're going to be better at it than we are, because you start to bend some of these things, and the angles start to get confusing. I start thinking about how much I slept in geometry. Probably not smart at the time, but it's pretty inexpensive to get going with. And so I can ask questions of that on the end, but I'm going to run through some stuff on plant bugs as well, because I think y'all may have had some issues with it this year. So what are plant bugs? If you look online, you're going to see this Lygus bug, right? Lygus bug and strawberry. It's all California stuff. You'll see some stuff from New York, Wisconsin. They have big issues with plant bugs. Lygus bug is actually Lygus hesperus. It's a different species than we have here. And so if you're reading about Lygus bug, it may not be appropriate or going to be exactly what you're seeing in Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, places like that. We don't see it in Arkansas. We have Lygus linealaris. That's the tarnished plant bug. It's the big cotton pest. Not as big of a pest in Georgia, Alabama, and places like that it is in Arkansas. It's our biggest pest in Arkansas, and then that and tomato fruitworm, depending on the year. What are they feeding on? They're actually feeding on these individual seeds. And so if they're on there early, they're going to feed on a seed and kill it, and the flesh or the fruit material around that seed is not going to differentiate properly, and so that's going to make it kind of have that cat-facing appearance. And so sometimes you'll see these dead seeds, and I don't think you always see that. Sometimes we'll see cat facing without dead seeds, but it's those little like bends in the berry, the little cat facing. That's from those seeds not differentiating. It doesn't just occur on the tip. You'll see that often where they say, well, often on the tip. This is what I see the most. It's kind of on that mid-berry portion on the shoulders that they're kind of, not really the shoulder, just like the hip almost of the berry, I guess if you wanted to say it that way. When do we normally see it in Arkansas? It's late in the year, and so we have these producers that our main fruiting season's beginning of April, into May, and if you're at the very end of May, you're pushing it far. It's getting into the mid-90s sometimes, and so we generally see plant bug injury starting in May, really bad at the beginning of June, and that's one of the reasons people kind of push out of it. They don't want to keep spraying, and they're getting bad berries anyways. But in the last 3 years, we've had it worse and worse and worse every year, and I would say that what that is just it's been hotter earlier and earlier and earlier, those 3 years. And so I'd say in 23, I was like, this is as warm as I remember it getting early. And then 2024 was absolutely a week or two warmer or earlier than that. And so plant bugs are coming up on wild host, and they're moving through those a generation, then coming into strawberries a little earlier when that happens. So I don't know if I mentioned it on the last slide. I was supposed to. Uniform in size. So you'll see this cat facing, and the seeds will all be the same size because they were all pollinated, basically. And so when you're getting cold injury or you're getting poor pollination or boron, those seeds are not properly going to be mature when it's coming to the fruit actually maturing. And so you'll see different sizes on the seeds. Plant bugs, you don't see that. And so here's some examples of different ones. Poor pollination, you'll see super small seeds and big seeds. And that's the big key indicator of whether or not it was potentially plant bugs. So you can see on those two, that's kind of what we normally see in Arkansas, and there's large seeds the whole way on those berries, and then they're cat-faced. Poor pollination here, you can see just random size seeds all over, and it's just not, whenever the flower pollinated, it just wasn't pollinated correctly because there was some type of frost injury or something. So where are the plant bugs coming from? Daisy fleabane is the one that I would say in y'all's areas probably has the most of them, and so this would be daisy fleabane. I worked at Auburn for just a few months, and we would go out and collect plant bugs on alternate host, and daisy fleabane is absolutely loaded up. But also, pretty much every clover, if you got a lot of crimson clover or other type white clover, things like that around your fields, they're coming off of those, and they're coming right out of the woodwork next to you. Pretty much anything that's got nice flowers in early spring, that's what they're coming off of. Whenever these start to senesce or the flower kind of going through that stage, they're going to move and look for other hosts. And whether it's a longer-lived adult or that's came from overwintering, or it's an immature that matured already through a whole generation. Usually occurs in May for us, so maybe April for y'all, maybe a little bit earlier. But warm weather allows those alternate hosts to come up a little earlier. Generally gets a little bit off track from where your strawberries are at because, the strawberries, a lot of times you're waiting on frost. And so even though it warms up early, plants are coming up, you may have a frost that comes in and tags stuff. And that frost also may tag some of these early plants, which moves plant bugs over onto you. So sampling, just like in cotton, it's going to be a beat sheet. A lot of recommendations for a white beat sheet, but what I found and what we do in kind of Arkansas is black coloration tends to work a little better looking for immatures. White's a little bit better for adults. I've had good luck. Just someone says, I think I may have plant bugs, and I just knock a plant onto where a portion of the black plastic is not very covered, and you'll see them on there if they're there. Watch out for aphids, though. They look like little small plant bug immatures, so you'll think you're seeing a plant bug immature, but it's really aphids, so just got to kind of look a little closely at it. But you can get a sheet or something like a lid to a plastic tub or something like that would work. You look online, there's thresholds all over the place. We haven't done any threshold work, so we're just kind of playing it by ear to a bit, but one plant bug every 20 plants. You can imagine if it's tagging a few berries in a 20 plant area, you're going to see it, across an acre pretty quickly. But the big thing is don't confuse it with other species. I think this is recorded, so you'll have this later, but look out for big eye bugs, things like that. You're eating your thrips, Lorraine will talk about those. And so you don't want those to make you think you have a bunch of pests when really you have some beneficials. Cultural control, the big thing is weed control, so keeping those alternate hosts down going into the winter and then coming out of it. But once you have a bunch of flowering plants and you're about to get into fruiting, if you go and mow those, you're just forcing the population over. So we see that a lot. We'll get a little bit of green fruit on there. Growers start thinking about cleaning stuff up because they're trying to make it look nice, whether the customers come in or not, or even just trying to make it clean so they can go through there and pick. And when you mow, you do not kill the plant bugs, but they will fly right over to whatever's green they want to feed on. So avoid mowing during fruiting. Try to keep that stuff down beforehand, especially if you have a lot of legumes or flowering plants around. Chemical, check your labels in your state. This is what is labeled in Arkansas. There's no promise for your state. But the thing that we always talk about is this Brigade or Danitol, really excellent options, but we have resistance in Arkansas for plant bugs. What we found through the last 3 years is if you're close to cotton country and they spray a bunch of these, there may be resistance. We've had some failures in East Arkansas, but West Arkansas, Missouri, we work with growers who Brigade does an excellent job. So where there's no resistance, I would say that's what I would use. It's the cheapest thing you're going to be able to find. Then Ryman, that's Novaluron, really good for if you have issues early. It keeps mature or immatures from becoming a problem. And then if you do have any issues with bifenthrin not working, you can mix in Actera or a cell, so acetamiprid or thiamethoxam. That mixture does a really good job, even where we have resistance in Arkansas. But Transform, it just recently got a label or sulfoxaflor. That version of sulfoxaflor got a label for strawberry, and that's, to me, that's the Cadillac option. It does a really good job. So there's some research right now on trap crops, kind of working with this idea that there's an edge effect for plant bugs in a lot of bug species, so they put alfalfa around, and maybe y'all are getting too far south for that. But something we may consider looking at in Arkansas. Basically, plant bugs come in, hit the exterior alfalfa trap crop, and then barely come into the first one or two rows, and they kind of hit that pretty hard, spraying instead of spraying the whole field as much. And then there's looking for some monitoring too. So there's some work on trap types, pheromones, things like that they're looking at, and so keep an eye out for that in the future. With that, I'd be happy to answer questions. Like I said, we have a YouTube page where we put up spray guides relevant to Arkansas, but relative to other places. But also, we're doing some sprayer calibration videos that should be out soon, and we have that how to build a sprayer video. We got blackberry stuff on there, vegetable stuff. We work on a little bit of everything, and we have a blog and a pest page. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think I got like 4 minutes. Look at there. Yeah, starting 10 minutes early gives you some benefit. Yeah.
I heard you say that y'all were calibrating on the super sprayer just like with the broadcast spray, but I know I've been at other conferences, and that's always a big question that I've never seen the plant pathologists agree on. If you got a man spraying with a boom sprayer broadcast versus a man spraying with 3 nozzles directed at the road, not spraying the road middle, do you apply the same rate of fungicide per acre?
So
You adjust.
your acreage it's actually a banded application. So your swath, whenever you do your calibration, is the area that is being hit by that pesticide. So say you are on 6-foot centers, right? You're only actually going to apply a half acre when you go out there because you're not putting it in the middles. Now, if you're spraying and you're seeing it cover the middles, you may ask yourself, should your swath really be the whole thing? But so when we do our applications, you'll look at the equation and it's going to say your swath in inches. So we do 36 inches divided by 5. That's the number you use in that equation because we have a 5 nozzles pointed at 36 inches, and that is what our equations actually take into account. So when you do that, you end up putting less fungicide in the tank or per acre because it's a banded application. You're not spraying a full acre when you go across an acre of planted strawberries, So.
All right, with that said, if you've got plant bugs, we don't really have that much where I'm at, but anyhow, if you've got disease, you've got people picking fruit, throwing them on the row middle, shouldn't you be spraying that row middle too?
I think my first step would be I would stop throwing them in the row middle. We have a grower in northwest Arkansas who had bad anthracnose issues, and he swapped from putting them in the row middles to pulling them out, and he said it's the biggest thing that lowered his anthracnose pressure. And so he was spraying across with the air blast in the middles, and it didn't matter that he was spraying them because he was putting them in the middles. But once you start getting your pickers to prioritize putting into another bucket and taking them out, it really will pay dividends. And so I would say you can avoid needing to spray the middles. I wouldn't put any flowering plant or legume in your middles, and if you don't do that, then plant bugs won't be that very attracted to it. And so they're moving around. If they're landing in your middles and they don't find something to feed on, they're going to your strawberries, and there should be residual insecticide there. And so I think you can avoid spraying them. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, if you're listening to this later, I'm sorry. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just to confirm, you said you had in Arkansas Lycus lineolaris, non-Hesperus.
Correct. Yeah, we have Lygus lineolaris, and my guess is that all of us probably do. I'm not aware of Hesperus across the Rockies, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
The tarnished plant out west, they use vacuums for a lot of Lycus. Is the tarnished plant bug after that, or is it too large?
I think if anything, Hesperus is bigger, so they'd be a little smaller. It'd be interesting. I've seen some of their work where they're doing that, and I think it'd be interesting to try it. It's an endemic pest. It's the whole time, and they're long seasons. For us, it's just kind of like with y'all. Like maybe I don't have plant bugs, and most years we don't. But if it keeps up what it's been doing, and where it's a problem every year, it may be worth trying to look at that. But they use those bug vacs on the setups they have for those big sprayers where they can go across tons of rows at a time. And so I don't know that you can get it being cheaper than Transform just on one row at a time. And so I guess if Arkansas decides to get rid of half of our pesticides in 10 years, then maybe we'll start looking at it and maybe that'd be a better way to do it. But I don't know. One more question, if anybody's got one.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And with that, I would like to introduce Lorena Lopez. She will be doing a presentation on regional insights on invasive thrips infestations in strawberry crops of the Southeast, and she is from NC State.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. So today I'm going to talk about the regional distribution of invasive thrips of concern in strawberries, but briefly I want to introduce myself. So I've started about 11 months at NC State as an assistant extension professor, and I've been working with integrated pest management in vegetables and small fruits for a long time, but now my program at NC State focuses on small fruits and tobacco and a little bit of leftover vegetables. But mostly in small fruits and tobacco. I do a lot of work with biological control, IPM, biological control compatibility, and also distributions of pests and natural enemies. So I'm going to talk about 3 pests of concerns in the region because on these 11 months and my previous time in Virginia, I've got a lot of questions about what could happen in this area related to these invasive thrips that we see in the South, like in Florida and here in Georgia. Well, we're here in the South, so. I'm going to focus on pepper thrips, chili thrips mostly, and then a little bit on what we have in North Carolina. I'm going to talk a little bit about different prediction models for these invasive pests, and also got a little deeper into what could happen in North Carolina. So I'm going to start with pepper thrips, an invasive pest that showed up in Florida in 2020. Then I'm going to focus a bit more on chili thrips, which we have in Florida since 2005. And then if I have time, a little bit on our native western flower thrips. Pepper thrips, for the ones that haven't heard about it, is Thrips parvispinus. It's an invasive species from South Asia. It was reported in Florida since 2020, and it's categorized as a quarantine pest, and is found mostly on fruiting vegetables, mostly in peppers. It could also be found in some bean plants in Florida. The concern and the questions that I've had is that this quarantine pest is going to affect my strawberries or not. And it's because these strawberries are reported as a host for this pest. Especially in India, it has been found causing some damage to strawberries. However, even though we have all these strawberries in Florida and they're in Florida, there are no reports of these pepper thrips going into Florida strawberries as of yet. As of November last year, where I was able to meet with people from Florida, specialists in strawberries, they have not found it yet, so they are not concerned for now on that pest. So basically, not in strawberries, yet not in North Carolina. Actually, it's confined to Florida, even though this has been established in multiple counties. And actually, this is the county that produces most of the strawberries in Florida, and we're looking at them here. They're mostly found in peppers and in ornamentals. So as of now, we don't have to worry about that. Only in continental US, only in Florida. Now, we don't have to think about that much, but now talking about chili thrips. So chili thrips are also an invasive species. They're also from South Asia. And recently has been shown that it's actually a complex of a cryptid species complex comprised of 9 to 11 subspecies that are not distinguishable morphologically, only with DNA analysis. It is a generalist pest, like most of these thrip species, that has more than 200 plant hosts reported with more than 40 families of plants. Some of them, people say that it could be just overblown numbers because sometimes it just passed through. Maybe it's not a reproducible host, but it's still a no. We just know that it's a generalist pest. Many ornamental vegetables and fruit species are their host plants. The good thing is that these thrips are able to transmit viruses. However, it has not been reported to transmit any viruses through strawberries. So that's one good thing. They usually feed on young leaf tissues, not pollen like flower thrips, and they can undergo development from egg to adult within 2 weeks under optimal conditions. And I'm going to talk about optimal conditions a little bit more later. You can see here the immature and the adult. And then it is important because it can feed on strawberries as soon as 2 weeks after they're transplanted. So in Florida, they transplant the seedlings, they put overhead irrigation to establish them, and then as soon as they cut off the water, these thrips are jumping into these small plants. They feed on the midrib, and this is the injury that they cause. They darken the leaves, starting in the veins. They also stun the plants because imagine a 2 week after transplanting tiny plant, they don't get to grow properly. So the yield is affected, and also they can stay through the entire season in Florida, affecting also the fruit. Of course, this bronze fruit is not marketable, okay? So that's why it is important. And I want to highlight that this is a very characteristic injury that these thrips cause. It's really different to what we found with Franklinia occidentalis, western flower thrips. It's very, very different injury. So it is important that we know that this injury, how it looks, and as far as I know, we have had not reports, we haven't had any reports of these injury being seen in North Carolina as of now. Now, let's go a little bit wider, and the chili thrips distribution worldwide in 2021, this is what we got, okay? So again, generalist pests across the a lot of areas in the entire world. Just pay a little bit of attention here in Europe. It was found 2021, and now we have a new map in 2023, and then we lost the establishment in Europe. We'd add a few establishment points in Latin America, and we lost this. The reason for that is that climate conditions here are probably too cold, and they were able to eradicate when they found these populations of chili thrips there. We still have them here. Again, we gain a few ones. In the case of the United States, we first intercepted these thrips in Miami in the 90s. However, it was not established as a main pest, as the main pest in strawberry as it is today in Florida, until 14 years later when it started, when it was actually found established in roses. People started paying attention to it a little bit more, and they were widespread, and they were also in strawberries. That would all the problems start in strawberries in Florida. And in Georgia, it has been reported since 2007, and mostly there we have some strawberries there, but it is also found a lot here in blueberries, unfortunately. Now, there was a survey done for the US. When they checked, they had more than 100 samples from different states in the US on these years, and this is what they found. So basically, they found all these different positives, reports of chili thrips. In yellow represent one subspecies. Remember, 9 to 11 subspecies in one species complex. This is just one of them. And then we also have another subspecies that is more adapted to cold climate. So these are actually established here in New Jersey, meaning that they can hibernate there, and they can establish where there are seasons. So this is really concerning. In North Carolina, on this side, we have still the one that is more in the south. So it is unclear what we can get or if they can establish here. They have only been reported established in continental US, and in this region, in Florida and New Jersey. The other ones are reports, and it's still undecided if they have been established or not. They have been found in New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. That's the hibernating subspecies. And then the other ones have been intercepted, not in strawberries, in the case of North Carolina and South Carolina and Virginia. Okay? In North Carolina, establishment is unknown right now. We haven't done surveys yet. That's one of my priorities, to know what is the status of these pests in North Carolina. However, growers most of the time in North Carolina are not worried about thrips. They usually don't have issues with thrips. But in the last few years, they have had some severe infestations. We are unclear if this is maybe because development are resistant. So we need to see what's happening there. That's one of my responsibilities. So what is the establishment potential in the Southeast for these pests? There was a study in 2008 that run multiple models. One of them is a host map. So basically they selected 26 of these, of their hosts, and reclassify it. And basically everywhere where you see blue or 1 represent the amount of, so there's 0 acreages on that county that contains suitable hosts for chili thrips. If you see red or 10, it represents 75 to 100% of the acreages on that county contain suitable hosts for chili thrips. So basically, here in all the region, there are some areas that have between 10 to 50% acres on each county that are suitable for these chili thrips. They also did a cold temperature exclusion. So basically they selected all the areas that reached 24 degrees for at least 5 days, and they took it out. And they remain in area. They calculated the amount of the number of regenerations per year that these chili thrips have potential to have in those areas. So basically here in all these areas in red, they have the potential to have multiple generations per year. It doesn't mean that we're gonna have a ton and severe numbers of the chili thrips there. It just means it could have multiple populations through the year, but it could be very low populations, moderate populations is not ranching that. So just how many generations per year. And in the Southeast here, it has the potential for a lot generations per year, up to 12. Remember, within 2 weeks, they can go to egg to adult, that's 1 generation. Now they put all these things together and show that the model where they have potential to establish is all the South and this region in the Southeast, including part of the east of North Carolina, okay? So they could establish in this area. Now, there has been a more recent predictable model conducted last year. So remember the map where they have all the reports of establishment. These, Aguilar et al. Collected all these, created a new model, more potent model with other factors, and calculated the area of suitable area for establishment of chili thrips throughout the world, okay? So the darker the color, the more suitable is that area for the chili thrips to establish. The yellow, the more close to yellow, the less suitable it is. And we're seeing here that all the Southeast, a lot of the Southeast is actually suitable for establishment, included a lot of the East Coast in North Carolina and South Carolina, and a lot suitable, of course, in Florida. They also determined that rainfall and cold temperatures are the most important factors limiting the establishment of these chili thrips. So now we're gonna go into deep conditions for North Carolina. Based on that, rainfall is important if we have high rainfall, right? And, well, we're gonna start actually first with the temperatures. Remember the model in 2008, they took out everything that goes 25 below 24 for 5 days. If we go here, I'm showing 10-year average of minimum and average temperature in North Carolina. Same here for Florida. And this is monthly, Okay? So if you see here, in Florida, where we have chili thrips pretty much all year, we go pretty low to 35, however, the average is still 60. So it means they reach 35, but maybe here a little bit, but it varies a lot. Whereas in North Carolina, we go to 35, but still, the average is still pretty low, which means you're keeping that low temperature for longer. Even so, we're not that close to the 24, because this is kind of deceiving. This is a lot of averaging. And just like last week, I'm sure in North Carolina, we went through more than 5 years under 24. But then if we look deeper into all the accumulation of the lowest temperature in 10 years in North Carolina, this is years per month, or in all these, most of those lower temperatures, this is the range of 24, are in January, still we don't have that many 24. So it basically, based on all these models, it looks like chili thrips could have a home in North Carolina and in this region, unfortunately, based on all these prediction models. Now, when we go to rainfall, it says that the chili thrips, all these data say the chili thrips cannot establish if we have high rainfalls, like more than 78 inches per year. But in North Carolina, when we see historical rainfall per year, we are around 49. So they're not going to be that affected based on historical data of rainfall. But now if we compare rainfall with average air temperature, and this is monthly for North Carolina, monthly for Florida, we're seeing that the most months where we have rainfall is usually the summer, but it's still not that much compared to Florida. In Florida, they have, in the summer months, they have higher rainfall, still they have a ton of chili thrips. Okay, so it's still not comparable. None of these are comparable to the high rainfalls that they require to be limited to established. Now, I'm going to walk you through this comparison, and this is an oversimplified observation of the climatic conditions that could be suitable for chili thrips. So these are the months of strawberry season for both states, right? Now, we can highlight when we plant in Florida and when we plant in North Carolina are the same months, but we have very different systems because we have a lot of months here establishing the plants. We have only about 2 months or a little bit further of harvest in North Carolina, where we have a lot of harvesting here and maybe just 1 month of establishment. And we all know that. But now when we put on top of it the optimal conditions for chili thrips establishment, we see some interesting stuff. So we have dormancy in North Carolina, which we don't have in Florida, right? In both of those months. So basically, the optimal time for chili thrips to establish are early summer and complete summer and fall. Whereas in Florida, pretty much all year could be chili thrip time. Thus, they have, during the entire strawberry season, pressure of chili thrips. In a hypothetical scenario where we get chili thrips in North Carolina, the planting time qualifies as that optimal conditions when they can reproduce within go to egg from adult in 2 weeks. Let's say they establish here, but then it gets really, really cold. They're probably not gonna die, but they're gonna hibernate. They're probably gonna slow reproduction and slow development, and then go into hibernating state when the plants are in dormancy. But then when this goes back to going a little bit warming, they will start going into the optimal range when the plants are getting ready to be harvested. And let's say we get a lot of these chili thrips. chances are, yes, we may have some damage, we could have some damage, but at this point, the plants are already established. Remember, the chili thrips feed on young plants. In April, we're gonna find these huge plants that have a smaller percentage of young tissue that the chili thrips like to feed on. Still, it isn't clear how much damage they could cause if they showed up at the harvest stage. But at least we're not going to be in a scenario, probably, that the Florida has when after 2 weeks of transplanting, they're having these chili thrips that are stunting their plant and really, really significantly affecting their yield. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, even though we have all these models that are saying that, yes, welcome to North Carolina or South Carolina because we have the good conditions for you. It's not necessarily that way. And again, this is an oversimplified observation. There are a lot of other factors that could affect the establishment of chili thrips in our region. Now, when we look at the strawberry production in the US, I want to quote some of these studies because it says that when we're predicting more than 8 of these generations in these areas of these models, predicting models, then the growers can be significantly damaged. The strawberries can be significantly damaged. And we've seen how much damage the strawberries can get in Florida. And also, the impact of these pests can be disproportionately felt in low-income communities, small farms. And when we go, we see, yes, in Florida, it's a big, big issue. But remember, Florida, most of the strawberry production has these large farms, industrial large farms. And even if we go to California, assuming that they established there, they have all these industrial and huge farms that are not even close to compared to North Carolina, even though we are the third state producer of strawberries in the US. The thing is that North Carolina is dominated by small farms, small to medium farms. We do have some big farms there that are really important. So it is unclear what could be the impact of chili thrips if they are established in a state like North Carolina where we have these very, very different systems, okay? To summarize this part, so again, we're unclear about the presence of chili thrips. Are going to start doing some surveys, looking for the damage, looking for the thrips. As I mentioned, unclear how much damage the chili thrips could cause in the industry of North Carolina. We don't know if they can establish in North Carolina yet or not. All these models are based on the subspecies that are in the South. There's very few we know about the other subspecies and the subspecies that it's already established in New Jersey. We don't know if they could establish here or not. We don't know that yet, but all of this is not to alarm you, but actually to keep you alert. It is better for us to go and do a survey and say, okay, we're sure based on this survey that we don't have chili thrips, than not knowing anything about what's going on. Even if we find them, it's better just to know so we can take some action. So one of the priorities of my program is to take care of evaluating the status of these pests. They thrive in hot and dry conditions, low rainfall. So the predictive models based on that says that the southern region, it's a good area for these subspecies, but we don't know exactly how much or when it could happen or if it could happen. Remember that it was intercepted in Miami in the 90s, but it was only 14 years after that they could actually become a problem. Like most thrips, chili thrips have a low dispersal capacity and they disperse through wind. But they also take prolonged times, at least it has been demonstrated for chili thrips, for them to establish. So again, It is better to be prepared. In the meantime, we also need to keep attention, to pay attention to our native in North Carolina. As I mentioned, there have been some severe infestations with thrips in some of our strawberry growers. I said thrips because growers have never, or most of the time, do not differentiate species. And why would they if they have never had any issues? But now that we are having these things, chances are most of them are going to be Frankliniella occidentalis, but service has been done on strawberries more than 10 years ago. Things could have changed, and this is also a problematic pest. It could also coexist with chili thrips. The good thing is that they have not been reported transmitted viruses so far to strawberries. They also cause a lot of damage. This is the damage that I showed you before. And also, make sure not to confuse it with pollination. Aaron talked a little bit about the differences, but they could also cause the western flower thrips a lot of damage to our strawberries. So now that we're going to start doing these surveys to know about the chili thrips. We may as well want to know what's happening where our natives are also problematics. I'm just gonna go quickly over this. This is some of the things that I would like to do with growers and extension agents, train them how to look for them, where to look for them, because it may be different depending on the species, and it may be different based on different monitoring techniques. Some are more effective than others depending on the species, depending on the stage of the plant, where to collect and how to properly chip these samples to be identified based on species. We have a great diagnostician in NC State in Raleigh, where to send them, and also to use me as a resource. I also have my webpage where I usually post things and news, and I also available to address any questions that you have about thrips. We also have my IPM app that shows all the different thrips problems that we can find in strawberries. And lately, and I want to close with this, last year I was able to conduct the pest management and strategic plan for strawberries in the Southeast. So it basically includes Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So it was thanks to this scenario here in the conference that I was able to get together with growers and extension agents, and thanks to all your cooperation, I was able to compile all the assessment needs for this area, and one of them, of course, is chili thrips and other thrips. So I just wanted to mention that this was published last month. We have a brochure for that, so keep an eye on it, and thank you for all your cooperation with this. It has been really great. And also I want to thank my team, and thank you all. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Where they have plantation longleaf pines, and sandy land, real southwestern flower river, feeds on pollen a lot, and our populations are very hard to control.
I'm sorry, could,
They overwinter in like plantation longleaf pines. Y'all find is that true or false?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Southwestern flower river, we find that they overwinter in plantation pines, especially the longleaf pines, where they would spray pine straw in the sand hills of North Carolina, South Carolina, and that we have our populations never get in. Y'all, it's real high.
Yes, so
you're referring to some weeds that you have around your field, and because of that you have some thrips and they never go down. So actually I didn't put a lot of, I didn't focus this presentation on management, but one of the key management tactics to keep thrips down, any thrip species, it's with management. So all of these barriers around any forest areas or close to the strawberries or any flowering plants, most flowering plants unfortunately are attractive to thrips, and they can be a reservoir over the winter for those thrips and then jump into the strawberries. So they need to be kept out of the field through the winter
Let me ask you
to help.
what we find is we got like a refuge, natural refuge. They have like 9,000 acres, and the predominant wind blows from their property onto our property. So, you know, and a trip can't fly too well, but it blows with wind. You kill them all, and the next day they're in the same population because it blows straight from the pine trees straight into the field. So that's what we're up against.
So I want to add to that. So yeah, weed management, all that flowering should be taken care of, taken out, but also because what you're saying, if you know where they're coming from, you can also implement some border sprays. They're usually higher at the border of the field compared to the center. That way you can just focus on that area so you don't have to overspray the rest, because chances are most of them are in the border spray. So modifying a little bit of your spray schedule could be useful, and then avoid using pyrethroids like bifenthrin that they could exacerbate sometimes, so that may be useful too. Any other questions?
Just more of a comment. So unfortunately, to be a bearer of bad news, we do have harvest finest now here in Georgia as of this spring. But not only Georgia, Colorado, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ontario, and South Carolina.
My
And
goodness.
so anywhere that's getting more ornamental shipped from Florida, it's going to be a problem.
Thank you, and I really appreciate your comment, because as of November, I specifically asked some specialists in Florida, and they were like, no, it's just in Florida, but I understand that it has been intercepted, like you mentioned, and I appreciate that because things change with these invasive species very, very quick, like you're all hearing right now.
80% of South Georgia counties, we found it. So.
Wow, that's unfortunate. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez. And for this discussion, we will just do the questions at the end after all three of them have presented.
All right, good morning. Wow, we've got quite a crowd here for this discussion, and what I'm going to do is give just a short introduction of what we're seeing in North Carolina, show a few pictures, and then turn it over to my colleagues, and then we'll turn around and have a group discussion with all three of us. So my name is Bill Klein. I'm a plant pathologist at North Carolina State University. You may know me from blueberries, have been at the research station at Castle Hayne for a pretty good while now, and mostly have worked with blueberries, but turning my attention somewhat to strawberry and to this Neopestalotiopsis problem. And so if you were at the North Carolina strawberry meeting, you saw some of these images and heard some of this discussion at our meeting in the fall, in November. But so we'll just go through this, show a few pictures, and then I'll turn it over to whoever wants to be next. So we're talking about a fungus, a Neopestalotiopsis. For years, we considered this group of fungi as secondary weak pathogens, and those fungi are still around that we call Pestalotia or Pestalotiopsis, and they're really not much of an issue. We see them occasionally, but Neopestalotiopsis is new, and it's an aggressive form of this pathogen. So it has really been a game changer for strawberries, caused a lot of plant loss, a lot of monetary loss, and a lot of concern. What we're seeing in North Carolina in the fall of the year is we see plants start to drop out, and so this is sort of a typical symptomatology there. You have this sort of fall growth that's a little more compact, so you can tell this is fall of the year. But you'll see an individual plant usually scattered in the field, and the leaf reddening and stunting is characteristic for this, which is it seems to be a little bit different from anthracnose, where you very often see the whole plant collapse very quickly. So it seems to be a little bit of a slower collapse. we do not see much of the fruit rot in North Carolina. This fruit rot from Neopestalotiopsis I bought in the grocery store in February in North Carolina, so it was probably a strawberry from Florida, and this fruit rot symptom was right there on the sporulating on the fruit. So, but it's described as a crown disease, leaf spot, and fruit rot. It's in many states now. There's a question whether it can over summer in plant debris. You know, with our strawberry planting cycle, we're planting in late summer and fall, and then taking the plants out, and we have this over summer period where the fields are fallow. Research in Florida has shown that the infected crowns and leaf tissue can over summer during that period. Whether that's a source of inoculum remains to be seen. Right now, we feel like the disease is coming with the plants to the field. Most effective fungicides have been Thiram and Switch. There's some efficacy with the FRAC 3 fungicides, and so we've been recommending them as well. This past year, we saw Neopestalotiopsis in our plant disease and insect clinic on infected tips that were sent in to the clinic. So just no question that those tips had the disease. They weren't even rooted yet and already showing symptoms. So that was very distressing to see that. This is a sample that came into our clinic. You incubate these leaf tissues, and you can see the fungus producing these black spore masses on the back side of the leaf. Has a very distinctive looking spore, so fairly easy to diagnose from that. Also in North Carolina, we do have some winter production, some protected high tunnel production. So we get an early look at what the plant sources look like. So when these are set, and they start expressing symptoms sooner than the plants in the field will. So under the tunnels, we'll very often see Neo first. This is an example of the typical symptoms that we'll see under those high tunnels. And one thing that the growers picked out very quickly, and we were able to verify by isolating from these crowns, is you can very often tell it's Neo from the color of the foliage and the stunting in that crown. So that reddening of the leaves around the crown, the older leaves, seems to be indicative, if not diagnostic. We would go out in the field, collect these plants. We would have wilting plants that had the reddening and wilting plants that did not have the reddening, and they tended to separate out into Neo for the red and the Colototricum for the other. Sometimes you would get both out of the same crown, so it's not an absolute thing, but this seems to be an indicator. And that persists through the season. This is early spring in the tunnels when they're about to play out, and you still see this reddening and still see plants going down. Again, I don't think this is spread within the tunnel. I think it's infection of the original plant that just finally expressed. So we went with a fall and winter disease management strategy this year because so much emphasis on how clean the plant source might be. So really stressed diagnosis using fungicides as needed. Really want to encourage folks to manage row covers to avoid a moist chamber underneath the cover, and mostly are using protectant fungicides in the fall of the year with the idea that we're saving some fungicides for spring that we wouldn't use in the fall. Sort of the overall management has been a whole laundry list of things that you can do at various stages of the season. Disking to bury that debris before planting, fumigation, disease-free plants, monitoring and sanitation, handling fruit and plants dry. So all the sorts of things that you think about as general disease management practices for strawberry with soil-borne or plant-borne diseases. And then in the spring, alternating fungicide applications to include, or this was thinking about fall yet, with the FRAC 3 materials in there, maybe Switch, but mostly a backbone of Thiram for the spray program. Again, we don't see a lot of this fruit rot in North Carolina. The samples that come into the clinic, probably a couple hundred samples this past year or even more, are mostly crown disease, sometimes leaf, but rarely get a fruit rot sample. And so that's what we're seeing there. But if you do see it on the fruit, you'll see this sort of symptom where the you have this sunken lesion and then the black sporulation, the fungus coming through, and that's just a really profuse amount of spores produced there. So I can see a situation being where this could splash disperse through a long harvest season and really move plant to plant, sort of like anthracnose does. In thinking about anthracnose and gray mold, I created this sort of Venn diagram to show which fungicides work for which thing, and then in the center, which ones worked for both gray mold and anthracnose. So this is getting a little old now, but rather than try to rework that, I just went in and circled in red the things that we're recommending for Neopestalotiopsis. And so you can see in that group that's effective for gray mold and anthracnose, switch is also a Neo product. Thiram is also a Neo product. And then down in the lower corner, at least for the fall, we're including the Frac 3 materials, the Rime Inspire Tilt for Neo. So that's a quick rundown in a nutshell of what we're seeing in North Carolina, and I'll let one of these gentlemen, whichever one wants to go next, pull up their material. I think we'll probably hold questions until the end. Okay. All right.
So, welcome everybody to this session. Thank you so much for inviting me to also be a speaker today. And well, I'm Guido Schnabel. I'm working at Clemson University, and I'm a fruit crop specialist, or plant pathology specialist on fruit crops. So this year was kind of unique because you know, there were some alerts coming out from nurseries saying that unfortunately they were having a neopest problem. So it was to be expected then that some of the nursery supplies would be affected with neopest. So they were putting out that warning, and so as a consequence, we surveyed several farms, mostly in the upstate of South Carolina. There was, I was touring with Andy Rollins, our county agent up there, responsible for upstate growers, and I wanted to share some of the observations that we took. So it's basically a snapshot, and the tour was done on October 31st and October 30. We covered several different areas. Not all of them got their plants from nurseries that reported to have a problem with neopest. For example, this grower over here, so that's October 31, so his strawberries, his Albions were probably planted 4 weeks before October 31. They're pretty well established already. The entire farm looks very good, and he had only a few problems. As you can see on the right-hand side, you had to really look for problem areas in that field. And they were Fusarium in Albions, and I think Fusarium is one of the things that we are seeing more often now, not only in South Carolina, but also in North Carolina, something we need to keep an eye out. One of the characteristics of Fusarium is this. Do we have a pointer? Let's see here. Is this the flanking of the crown can be necrotic. So this area around the crown first seems to be going down first with Fusarium, and then at later stages the entire crown can also be occupied, which then makes it very difficult to distinguish it from anthracnose or Phytophthora or even Neopest. He also had problems with Phytophthora root rot over here. That plant over here went down from a Phytophthora root rot. So, but those were the only problem areas that we identified. But I knew that at this farm, Neopest was observed the year prior. So I know that Neopest is an issue at this farm, but he stayed on top of his spray schedule, and he also got plants that looked really good. In a second location, the grower got his strawberry plants from a Canada nursery, which did not report to have any problems with Neopest. And the plants looked like this when planted, so I was lucky enough to be there when they actually planted. And yes, there was some yellowing of the leaves, but that was, I think, related to stress through transition and shipping. But on the yellow leaves, I really did not see any evidence of any fungal problems. And I think that he's going to do just well, and the plants look really good. But that was not the only site that we visited. We visited then 3 other sites where the grower knew that the plants had Neopest, and we actually confirmed Neopest on those plants in our diagnostic clinic. And right from the get-go, when they planted, they knew that there was something wrong with the plants, because the plants already looked stunted, and they already had leaves, a lot of leaves that had died. But he had to plant those plants anyway, and he was hoping for the best and trying to keep the fungicide program up. We sent out a fall application recommendation, and he did so, but he did also have certainly symptoms of disease on those plants. And I followed up with him just the other day. Actually, I got an email from him on December 30th, and he said that he's not happy with those strawberry plants. They're still stunted. They haven't really done very much in comparison to another block that he is growing, where the plants actually came from another nursery. These plants that were plug plants versus the other plants that were planted later, and those were cutoffs, these plants were looking more poor than the plants that were cutoffs planted later. So there was certainly a stunting effect to be observed. That's another area, another grower in the upstate, and he had the same problem. The plants that he received were just already looking not good. Lots of death already, dead leaves. And the grower is hoping that the new shoots and the new crown will emerge, and that he has something that he can harvest. Whether or not this is true, I don't know. I haven't heard from him. I tried to get in touch with him, but I haven't heard about the current status of those plants. This is a different location, also in the upstate. Here, most of the plants look good. There were some areas where the plants don't look so good, and we know that Neopest is an issue over there, so we confirmed that one. And the grower was telling me that in that particular area, the plants still look stunted. So they haven't really done much either. And the same is true for this location. I talked to this grower as well, and these plants haven't done very much since October 31st, despite the fact that we had warm weather in November. They haven't done very much either. So take-home message here really is, if the plants that you are receiving already look weak and sickly, then there is no point in planting those. I think they're not going to recover to the point where you can get your money back. But we will keep an eye out for those plants and see how they do. And just always want to remind you that we have excellent resources that you can tap on. The Southern Region Smart Fruit Consortium has excellent spray guides and production guides. I also try to really update our MyIPM app with relevant information. So the sanitation practices, for example, that Bill was talking about, they're all in the Neopest section of the strawberries and the MyIPM app, as well as any cultivar susceptibility information that we get in, and any of the fungicide efficacy information that we can obtain. So that's updated in there. One thing that Bob Hall is asking me to do every time, please join the South Carolina Grower Association, because they are trying to make a difference, and membership matters, your voice matters. It has already mattered because we are able, with their help, to hire 2 new specialists working on small fruits in South Carolina. So you're making a difference if you participate. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Phil.
I'm going to give you a little bit of update on our experience in Georgia, and this is a little bit historical as well. I think it's accurate to say we've had more problems with this for longer than South Carolina or North Carolina, except for the fact that we've had some nursery sources out of North Carolina. But nonetheless, it's been a problem for us for a while now. And it's varied by year for various reasons. Originally, this was reported in Florida. I think most of you are aware of that. Natalia Perez down in Florida was the first one to report this. And this was in around 2018 or 19 or something like that. She started seeing this, okay, and started at least trying to figure it out. Initially, this was tied specifically to really one nursery, maybe two at most. And so that was the beginning of it, okay? And in fact, this is a news flash kind of a thing. I put out a blog post, and I guess this is in 2020, I believe is right. And actually, I was credited with being with the University of Florida, which I was very proud of at that moment. So I had dual citizenship. But nonetheless, we did put out information on this. And that was, you know, if you look at what I was saying then, I said I gave the information that we had from Natalia's program about switch and Thiram, but also said it only gave about 50% control. And I think that's probably accurate. These products, when I say we're recommending them, they are not as good as we'd like, but she has actually done a good job of rating them, and at least we know they do have activity. And I said we've not confirmed it at that point. So this is early in the year, and we had not yet confirmed it. Well, it wasn't that long before we did have it, and by April 16th, if you look at this particular news article, Georgia strawberry farmer is wiped out in this year's crop. I think that was a quote Bill Brim, one of our larger vegetable producers, had some strawberries, and that was that same year. So I went from not having seen it to having seen it, and we had quite a few producers who were hurt pretty badly by it. And then the next year, those who got their plants from the same nurseries again also had problems very early, and we saw it early in the year. By that next year, we had some producers who were getting plants from different sources. It became very clear, if you got clean plants, you didn't have it. If you got dirty plants, you did have it. And that was very early on, we were seeing that. So where does it come from? Why all of a sudden do we have this thing? And that is a question that we'd love to know, and we don't have the answer to it. But there's some interesting things about it. Bill's already shown these pictures of what it looks like microscopically, but it is an interesting little fungal organism, but again, generally has not been a major pathogen or not considered to be a major pathogen. But things are starting to change with this pathogen. It's not just here. So I'm just going to throw this out there because it's something I am noting. And they're different species of Neopestalotiopsis, and I don't even know that we know what we have that's causing the problems on our strawberries right now. But you look at these reports from Mexico, you look at the symptomology of those plants and the roots and the berries, it all looks very similar to what we're dealing with, okay? That's coming out of Mexico. This is another report, and now this is out of Spain. Again, another Neopestalotiopsis. So I'm saying that worldwide we're starting to see this kind of crop up, which is kind of interesting. Can't explain it all. This is from one of my, you can see that looks like Chinese type writing down at the bottom. This is from Taiwan, one of my former students, and he sent me this. And you can look at these symptoms, and by golly, I mean, it looks just about exactly like what we're seeing, right? It's also something similar in the Philippines. So these don't, I'm not saying these are the same species, same organism, but the Neopestalotiopsis is kind of rising to the fore as a pathogen for some reason, and it is much more international. The one thing that this guy told me, and I think it's true also from some of the situations we have, we talked about resistance in plants. I don't think we're going to be able to spray our way out of this. I do think it's going to take breeding, and there's some efforts, especially in Florida right now, to breed. Unfortunately, those particular varieties may not be great for us. So that's the other question, what are we going to do in our area? But breeding is going to be critical. They saw in this particular case, when they had certain new cultivars they put in the field, they had a bad problem. They went back to the old cultivars, they didn't have the problems. That just shows there's some genetic association with it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because Bill's already covered it, but we do see fruit symptoms in Georgia. We have seen it and we do see it. So I can't say that we probably are starting to maybe transition with more of the crown symptoms, but we do see fruit symptoms. And you can see where this is sporulating, that's kind of sticky. We've said there's an association with spider mites kind of walking through that and then puncturing and increasing it. That's a concern under the cloths in the winter. And you can see what that looks like, and then you got all your little spores. Now this is one of our first sites in Georgia where we had this, and it was really bad. And so you can see how much damage is done in that field. That was one of the wipeout years early on. Talking about the overwintering capacity of this thing, we tried a fumigation trial at that location. We put out Vapam through the drip to kill the plants, removed as much of the plants as we could, plowed up the rest of it, and then did a test where we looked at solid tarping with pit chlor, but also putting Vapam strips underneath that, and then going back in after all that, removing that plastic and going back in with a regular pit chlor and plastic. So you think about how many fumigants we put out there. All right, so that's a lot. That's just to see what we could do with it. And Natalia's done similar things. So again, we did end up with something that looks like that. But going back to this, with all that, we did not see Neo in the field that next year at all, nowhere. Now, every level of fumigant helped us. I can say that. Every single level of fumigant helped us in that site. At the end of the season, we were able to put in a moist chamber leaves, and we pulled out the aggressive Neo. It was still there, but we had knocked it back to a level that it wasn't causing problems. At very low levels, it's probably not going to be observed. As soon as the higher the levels are that you're bringing in, if you bring in plants with it early, you're in trouble because it's going to build up, and that's the problem. This is what we were seeing this year, and obviously, if you have this kind of disease in your trays and stuff coming in, that's going to be a problem. Some people were able to get plants from different locations that didn't have it. They're generally doing better, but this is one of our producers in November. You can see the degree of death and decline on those plants where you brought it in from the nursery. This is another shot here. This is in December. Some of this is distorted and coming off the side here, but you can kind of see what's going on there. Again, not good, not good. So we're setting ourselves up, depending on where you got your plants and what kind of plants you got and how clean they came in, that's kind of going to be the story this year. It's going to be the tale of two cities. And so we've got good strawberries and we've got really bad strawberries, unfortunately. That's kind of where we are. Okay, I'm done. I guess we have time for Q&A or discussion or that kind of stuff as well. So maybe we can all stand up here behind the podium and talk as needed. Sure. Yeah. Questions? Yes, sir, over here.
About row covers, I know we've seen Neopestalotiopsis a few years and followed it, and I know I had a grower that had it 2 years ago. Then last year he moved, but the last year it started in the corner of the field closest to where it was the prior year. And I've seen that on numerous occasions, which makes us think it's overwintered somehow on that farm. But here's the question, on that particular farm, he had 2 rows he didn't ever row cover because of the way the rows were laid. He used 100% new row covers. The 98% of the field that had row covers had NEOP. The 2 rows never row covered, never showed NEOP symptoms. So there's a big question mark on how row covers are interfering or spreading it. We're convinced it's spreading it, but I just want to see what y'all's take on some of that comment was.
Well, I'll make a couple, because this came up yesterday in a question that I had. Somebody sent me an email about it. And I'd say that we don't know as much as we'd like to know, but let me say this. Row covers keep it warm and moist. And This particular organism will infect at relatively lower temperatures, but it does much better when it's warm and moist. And so I think that's part of it. The other thing about row covers is you do get spider mites caught up under row covers, and they do a lot better under row covers sometimes too. So I think there's an anecdotal information to say that spider mites can exacerbate this or spread it more. So row covers can be problematic. People like to leave their row covers on for long periods of time. Some people don't like to take them off. I think with this disease, it's going to be more imperative that you use them when you need to use them and then you take them off. And that the other question has come up, and Guido, I think this was one that we talked about this summer about how do you sterilize a row cover. This organism will stay on for a long period of time, and so if you put your row covers away, it's possible you could actually carry it over potentially. So that's another question that we have as well.
Correct, and I'm not sure if a lot of work has been done. I'm not sure if a lot of work has been done with regard to cleaning up row covers that may still harbor some spores, and those spores, they can survive for periods of time. There might also be still plant debris on the row covers, and that also can harbor the fungus and the spores. I know you can wash them. You know, it's a big effort to wash with bleach, a bleach solution or something like this, the row cover. But theoretically, you should be able to heat treat row covers. I know that at about 44 degrees Celsius for about 3 hours, the fungus is dead. 44 degrees Celsius is what, 120 Fahrenheit, maybe, something like that. So if you can incubate your row cover for that long of time at that temperature, it should be fairly sanitized. But I think more work needs to be done here to really figure this out.
We've got there's some mobile, in North Carolina, there's a lot of the biker sale trays that are steam cleaned, and there's some guys that got 18-wheelers, got mobile units, and we have got some row covers that we've run through that system, and we're going to keep an eye on. We've done that for 2 or 3 years now.
I think that would work, yeah. There's a good chance that this would work. Any other questions?
Does the variety of strawberry determine how prevalent it is in crops? You know, are the Ruby June more susceptible to it than Camarosa, or what are y'all seeing there?
So there are differences among varieties with regard to susceptibility. And the cultivar that you just mentioned seems to be a sensitive one. Albion is another one that is highly sensitive, and many of the Florida breeds are sensitive to Neopest. But there's some light in the tunnel. There are some cultivars that actually carry resistance genes, and these have been described by the Florida geneticists, and they are now trying to breed those resistance genes into their new set of cultivars. And so I'm hopeful that we will have at some point cultivars that we can all use that will help us with the spray programs, because I agree, we can't spray ourselves out of this mess. So host resistance is going to be a key to management. Whether or not the cultivars that they're producing in Florida will be suitable for, us in South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina will have to be seen. And I think some work needs to be done and some collaboration needs to be established to make sure that they give us the cultivars that we need.
Go ahead.
I got a question on prognosis of plants. And so we had a bunch of bad plants come into Arkansas. They looked bad. We had a bunch of good ones with a little bit of leaf spot here and there, but the plants looked good and they got planted and they grew out. Then we finally got a week of heavy rain. We had some plants collapse, red leaves, but most of the plants look fine. And so the question I get every week is, you have plants that look good, the plant source had bad NEOP. Is there a moment that you think you're out in the clear? What's y'all's expectations on plants that are fully green, no signs? Do you expect to see it pop back up? Is it latent somewhere in the plant? What's y'all's experience on that?
Bill, you want to try that one?
I'll give that one a shot. What we've seen in North Carolina, the question is if you have a little bit of Neo, is it just going to stay a little bit, or is it going to take the whole place? Our experience is if you have a little bit, you'll keep getting a little bit more and a little bit more through the season. By the time you get to the end of the picking season, you're still picking, you're still in business, but you continue to lose plants through the picking season. And I don't think that's spread in the field, spread in the field. I think as far as the crown rot, I think it came with the plants, and they're just eventually succumbing to that infection. So, I do. I think it's just persisting there, and also to follow up on the question about cultivars, we haven't seen anything where we said, "Wow, this is a resistant cultivar," among the ones that we're growing right now. What we are going to do at Castle Hayne, we've planted at our research farm there at Castle Hayne, is we've planted all the cultivars we can get our hands on and some numbered material, and I'm going to work with the folks on campus. Try to characterize some isolates and inoculate that field and see if we can kill it all. And if we get survivors, cultivars or selections that survive, that's part of going forward. And we'll have more knowledge in a year than we do now about what named cultivars might have some resistance. So, but that's a different epidemiology than this plant-borne crown infection, that's coming in from the nursery. So, that it remains to be seen how that will translate back to that transplant infection. But we're trying to make some headway here as quickly as we can with inoculating material and just seeing how it's going to respond to multiple isolates from different fields.
Yeah. Follow up on that. We recommend spraying Thrips, doing the spring switch, and we can't spray as much Thrips as y'all can. Or east or west of Mississippi.
Right. Yeah.
But so you think there, infection in the nursery, which we know we have, plants go out. What's the benefit of 9 applications of Neopestalotiopsis suppressing fungicides when a latent infection may pop back up?
Yeah, part of the answer to that question is just how little we know about the fungus, okay? So you hear 3 pathologists up here saying, I only see the crown infection, and another one saying, we see lots of fruit infection. So, if you have a plant-borne Neopestalotiopsis problem, you have to sort of plan against all eventualities, and that means go ahead and assume that you're going to have a fruit rot problem and a leaf spot problem with that. And go ahead and use the Thrips. So we're just being as proactive as we can. The problem with fungicides in general is their protectants, and so you can't wait until you see it to start spraying. So
and one of the things I'll say, because what Bill's saying is true, I think Bill's experience, and he was talking about this year about how he only saw it in the crowns predominantly. We have seen it on the leaves. We've seen it on the fruit. I think there could be different, well, we know there's at least 2 different aggressive strains now. So that's a given. They're different. They're 2 different aggressive strains. The way these things infect and what they do may be different as well, because we've seen, I think we do have splash spread when it hits these, especially with the fruit. We've had some of our sites have been wiped out, and the leaves have been spotted. It's interesting, Bill's talking about the under the hoop house, how you can see it. And I think it makes sense when you bring it in, it's still going to grow out on those plants that's already there. We had one situation when this first came in the first year, looking at it in the field. To me, it said how much moisture had to do with this, because we had a producer that had plants in a field, but he also had hoop houses, but the rows went from the field under the hoop houses. And he had a lot of disease in the field. As soon as you hit the hoop house, there was none. It was like a night and day. It's like you turned off a switch. So there's so much right now that's so confusing about this. I can tell you the one thing I think we're all going to agree on, source of your planting material is critical. If you get plants that don't have it, even if you had it the year before in your field. Now, yes, I would love for you to rotate. If you ask what I want you to do, I want you to rotate out at least a year, because we know it can survive in the soil for a year. But even in those cases where we don't have rotation, if we bring in clean plants, we've generally had really good experiences.
Neopest strains infect other crops? Has that been, I mean, we've since isolated some Neopest in blackberry, and it's pretty aggressive. And in apple, we've discovered it in the wood and reinfected the plants and it's, the trees, and it's been pretty aggressive. So
Maybe, I think so. I think in answer to your question, yeah.
on the other coast,
Blueberry, Jonathan Oliver's picked out the same strain out of blueberry, but we've not seen it explode in blueberry, things like that.
Right.
So again, I think there's a lot more to be learned about that too. Survival in other weed species and things like that's another thing. There were some questions over here. Somebody had some questions. I don't think we ever answered your question. Who was it over here? Yeah.
So my question is, these plants that I have in my field today that are infected, crown-wise, not foliage. So not started my irrigation system in March. Am I going to move those spores within that bed each time I irrigate?
Are you overhead irrigating?
No.
You're talking about just your irrigation within your drip irrigation? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I was going to say, no, in answer to your question, I don't think so. I think it's more rain splash. There are two things involved. One, it's rain splash if we're getting fruit and leaf spot infections, but it's also just the volume of water. When you have a lot more rain, a longer period of moisture, I think that's when you get into a lot of trouble with this disease, if you've already brought it in the field. In the back, and I'll let somebody else.
How about if you use systemic fungicide like Ridamil or K-Fight injected in the ground, and then if you put a heavy rate of that, would that help some sick plants?
No, Ridamil would not have an effect against Neopest. K-Fight is a plant strengthener, so it does strengthen the plants, and it might help the plant withstand some of the fungal pressure that it experiences, so it might live a little longer. That's a possibility.
If it's got a halfway chance, you put fight in there with that, and acid, organic acid, that'll help you.
I don't know about organic acid, but those phosphorus acids, if you apply, you have to apply them on a regular basis, like 10, 14-day intervals, so that the genes that they trigger will constantly be expressed on a very high level, and that makes the plant better. It makes it more resilient, and its ability to withstand a fungal attack is increased. So you would have to do it on a regular basis. Yes, Thyram would not help a plant that already is sick. So Thyram is going to be a protectant that you use to reduce the inoculum level in the field, right? Because you want to keep that really low. You can't heal the plant with Thyram. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah.
I'm going to turn it back on y'all for a second, because I want to get some input from y'all about what you're seeing, because a lot of you are growing strawberries. Mr. Matthews, can I pick on you?
Go ahead.
All right, so I know you had this at one point, and did you go to California varieties, or not varieties, but California sources, I should say?
I went to California last year.
How did you do this year? What did you do this year? Did you go to back?
Yeah, I went back to California.
And but you had a really good response last year to the plants you brought in.
Oh, I had a wonderful crop.
Okay, how do your plants look this year?
They look good.
So far, so good. Anybody else want to talk about plant source? Anybody getting them from different places? Yes, sir.
We've been getting out of California, but we only do the bare roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Mr. Klein, I've talked to you a couple times on the telephone about sprayers. But I don't know that we're getting the winter growth that we would like to see, but you can kind of see that's pretty much what we're seeing right now. We're not seeing a lot of disease, but when I talked to you about it in the fall, we had talked about the plants getting wet. So we went to a double drip tape system, to plant the bare roots, and we highly saturated, when we popped our holes, we highly saturated the holes with water, and then planted the bare roots into that, and had pretty good success. But like I said, we did everything we can not to get the top or the crown wet at all.
Mm-hmm. But you're not seeing the Neo coming in with those plants as far as.
We see some late in the year.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been getting from the same place in California about the last 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we've never had a bad outbreak of it, but we do see some red leaves late in the year.
Yeah.
You know, we do see some of the fruit damage that you're talking about late in the year. But to be honest with you, we see it on like Caminos or really small plants, and it almost looked like, because it was always on the west side of the beds, and so we thought a lot of it was, just bad sunburn.
Well, and sometimes you're going to see symptoms of. There's a lot of mimic type things that are out there too, so you have to be aware that there can be mimics out there. Somebody else raised their hands in the back. Yes.
Have y'all seen any Neo this year from bare roots that came from California this season so far?
I'm going to speak out of ignorance, and they all can comment as well. As far as I know, I've not heard of any connection with anything from California that's confirmed that it's a problem. So that's still what the current dogma is. I think it's, it may change over time, but that is the current dogma. Is that we're getting them out of California, there's been no confirmation of these aggressive Neos. They do have some Neos. Don't get me wrong. They do have some Neos in California, but they're not these aggressive ones, as far as I know. Are y'all aware of anything else?
I would just comment, we do have, when we're talking about the bare roots from California, I guess we're talking about the high altitude grown cutoff plants rather than what the old school bare root that had leaves on it. In North Carolina, we've seen these cutoffs have Neo late in the season, but it's on sites where there are other infected plants, and so no clear indication. And where it does appear in the cutoffs, it's been at a very low level, maybe 1% or less. So it's an open question whether it's moving in from adjacent fields that have the disease. And we're still figuring out the epidemiology of this thing. And so if I use anthracnose as an example, in the course of my career, we've figured out, hey, there's one Calototricum that's a crown rot, and that's how that fungus usually operates. And then there's another Calototricum in that Calototricum species complex that mostly causes fruit rot. Okay, so they're both Calototricum, and they cause different symptomatologies on strawberries. Just a thought, okay, that we may have Neopestalotiopsis strains or species that have different symptoms on strawberry, and we just don't know yet. We have to keep collecting. When I hear things like I'm only seeing it in the crown and other people are only seeing it on the fruit, then we really need to spend some time comparing those isolates and looking at the pathogenicity of them. So what we're going to try to do with inoculating is try to get fruit isolates and crown isolates and just use them all to inoculate the field there, because we're still learning so much about this pathogen.
To support what you're saying about the crown, I think in Georgia we are seeing some that are only in the crown too. Now,
Okay.
last year we saw both. We had some that were in the crown, and we had some that were fruit spreading and leaf spotting as well. So I think you're right on that.
We sent in some of both to y'all's survey, and so only one came back as the traditional aggressive strain, and that was probably the mildest case we had. But it was the typical, the plants didn't do much. The ones where it was spreading, that was the one y'all said wasn't the aggressive strain, but it was killing plants. It was spreading on leaf spot, and it was the biggest symptom we saw.
Well, it may have been the second aggressive strain.
That's what we figured it was the second.
Yeah.
That was the typical fruit rot, leaf spot.
And South Carolina, from what I've seen, it's mostly plant decline that affects us. I haven't seen too much of the fruit symptoms. It's mostly plant collapse.
As is there any correlation in the effectiveness of it on just soil type, you know, sandy loam versus a heavier clay or?
Not that I'm aware of.
I would think anybody knows that if there is. Anyway, you had a question?
Yeah, any recommendation on organic treatment for these things?
You know, you handle that.
You gotta go heavy with the sanitation and try the best you can to keep the inoculant level down. Obviously, you know, you don't want to have it in the first place, but if you do have it as an organic grower, maybe you need to really go in there and any affected plant, anything that is collapsing, just go in there and sanitize and take it out and destroy. Bury or drive it to the dump far away from your field. So as much as possible, practice sanitation. You know, don't work the plants when they're wet. If you can, use hoop houses to grow your strawberries so that you protect the canopy from moisture. You know, there's just no organic fungicide that I know that has any effect on this critter.
So y'all mentioned spider mites. Is there any other insect or anything that could carry or transport the disease that y'all seen other than spider mites being a correlation?
I think I'm the one that mentioned spider mites because just it's observational, anecdotal. If you have a heavy spider mite infestation, they're going to be moving things around and damaging fruit and damaging leaves and whatever. And so it's, I think anything that's going to be stepping into those spores and moving around or causing damage would have some impact. But that's probably the most direct thing I have observed. And that's strictly an observation. Don't count it as being real, it's just observation.
Well, they found in apples, right, that red mite and alternaria leaf spot were associated with each other. So it'd be interesting. I don't remember the whole paper, but yeah.
Yeah, there can definitely be insect interactions with fungal
Right,
organisms, yeah.
Or the red mite was carrying it or
Yeah,
not, but yeah,
yeah.
it was something with the stress.
Yeah, well, I remember a paper on tree frogs spreading
Yeah,
something,
there
so.
it is.
So, all right, we have 10 minutes, all right.
Thrips may be similar, they're just this idea that they're kind of trashing part of the leaf material and fruit material, and walking, the immatures are just walking through all the spores, so that's what gives that Thrips.
Yeah,
If it says something.
I see a hand up in the back there, yeah.
Is there any concern of this moving to any other crop?
Concern about whether it's moving to other crops. There has been some published work, I guess, out of Florida looking at nearby crops and doing some cross inoculations, and they did not have a lot of success showing that it was moving to other crops. So at least for like annual vegetable crops, they were pretty confident that was not the issue. So in the fullness of time, we'll know more. But right now, the indication is that it's not.
If you look close enough, you may find some information. There are two things you may find, and coming out of mainly one source. There is a source of information that says it does spread to other crops. That is not a university study. The work that Natalia's done in Florida and observation, again, anecdotally, it has not spread to other crops in the following year. So that's kind of the dogma we're going with right now. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, and I'll get you, okay?
I would say you can go.
And I'm going to get you, though. Okay. All right, what's your question?
What are the nurseries doing to address the problem? Anything?
I don't know. Bill, do you know anything?
No, I really don't know anything. I can speculate that they're doing what you or I would do if you were a nursery. You'd be looking at your plant sources really hard. You'd be dumping a lot of material, fumigating a lot, and going to new sites. And that's what I suspect that they're doing. This really hit the nursery in the form of millions of plants, not just that went out to growers, but that they got rid of. You know, they really took a big hit. So I think I have concerns about our nurseries even being there down the road. And so we may be going to the California sources because we don't have other sources. The other comment I would make about the California source, and this came from some really knowledgeable growers in North Carolina, Well, their concern was that in our coastal plain, we can do pretty well growing the California cutoffs. We have time to build a plant. The further you get into the state, the higher up the elevation goes, the less time you have to produce a plant. And just to have a crop the following year, or enough of a crop. So that's my concern with the cutoffs is where can we even grow them in our state and get the plant soon enough, get a big enough plant to produce a crop the next season. So a lot of big questions about what this is doing to our industry as a whole. Yeah.
It's a lot about getting clean tips to begin with, and then you can grow out clean plugs. Yes, ma'am, your question, and then I'll go to the one in the back, but yours first.
So I guess mine is more of a comment. So speaking on behalf of one nursery on some of their practices, sanitation has been certainly top of mind, steaming all of their trays, limiting the number of employees that are coming in and out, having thorough washing techniques for shoes, clothes, anything that would be coming in contact with spores. And then related to the organic question, but I would say also a good option for conventional, we've had only one trial done thus far with Howler Evo, and we saw some pretty good results. Again, I'm not saying it is a smoking gun. I don't think there is a smoking gun, but it is another tool. Howler Evo is another tool from a rotation standpoint and some, I would say more than suppression, but control of protecting the spread of the infestation.
So I can maybe comment on this one.
Excuse me.
So we looked at Howler Evo in the past, and yes, it does have a suppressive effect on some pathogens. One of the active ingredients is actually very similar to fludioxonil, which is a compound of switch. But when you look at the efficacy trials that come out of Florida, there's just nothing there. And in repeated studies. So I just the other day looked at all of what they've published, and Howler Evo together with other biologicals just failed miserably. So maybe under certain circumstances there might be some effect there. Maybe if disease pressure is very low, you might see something, but the effect is not consistent, to the very least.
In the back, there was a question in the back. Yes, sir.
I've dealt with a Canadian grower for probably 10 years, and he's saying that they're talking about heat treating all their plant materials. I don't know if that's going to be effective, but y'all say about the red colors, heat treating that, and he's talking about he's already devised a protocol for treating plant material. But I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah, so that's an interesting approach, and there is a company actually out of Norway which sells these plant saunas, and you can purchase those, and they will, they will basically sanitize your young plants in a way that it's safe for the plant but kills the fungus and even bacteria. Has to do with slowly ramping up temperature to a certain degree, and then adapting the plants, and then going a little bit higher to kill the fungus. So there's a little bit of science in there. But this has been done also in Florida, and it's a good method. And I think some of the nurseries are now looking at this seriously to use this as a possible means to clean their plants. So this might be something that they should look at.
But there's not good information yet that it works on Neo, is there?
Yes, it works on Neo.
It does.
It does work on Neo. It works on Neo, it works on anthracnose, it works on botrytis.
Okay, I knew it worked on anthracnose.
Yes. They established that.
Okay, good.
Uh,
All right, any other questions?
Hey, Phil, I got a quick. In Florida, I know it's, North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, but the other Florida people here, the lady that does my premises for Florida, her family grows 200 acres of strawberries down there in Plant City. And now the overall effect in Florida of this disease, has it been a fair? I know they had the hurricane, and the prices have been higher for a lot of other reasons, maybe, but what are y'all hearing from Florida UF and also from growers down there?
And And everybody else may have different things they're hearing. I think overall, Florida, they had a bad year or two. They largely changed plant sources, and that helped tremendously. I don't think they've had nearly as much of a problem. Also, they've attributed some of the reduction in problems just with having drier seasons as well. But my understanding in talking to Natalia is that overall it has not been as much of a problem as it was initially, and especially until it was known what it was and what was causing it and where the source of the inoculum was coming in with the plugs and stuff like that. I think by changing their sources for their plants, that immediately helped a lot. And they are ranking plants, again, there's no probably true resistance yet, but they've kind of ranked some of the plants. And I think that has helped maybe to concentrate on plants that get less of it. But I don't think, it's not wiped out the industry down there, and they're not just every year saying we're dying from Neopestalotiopsis now. Do y'all have any other comments on that?
Maybe not directly to the, maybe one comment with regard to nurseries, because we don't want to really demonize the nurseries here. And yes, the diseases are coming from the nurseries, but they're in the business of providing the best plant material that they possibly can, but they're not immune to getting infected in their operations. So I know from at least one of the Canadian nurseries, which is a significant source of many of the North Carolina suppliers, they threw away hundreds of thousands of plants trying to clean up this mess and starting new and fresh with new plants and doing everything they can so that this doesn't happen anymore. So they're doing the best they possibly can, and they did take some losses, but they were not afraid to do what's necessary to stay in business and provide good plants. So we need to work with them, because who knows? Next year, something else might come out of California. You never know. There might be a new fusarium coming out of California on their plants. You just never know. So we need, I think we need to have different nurseries in place that do their best to supply clean plants, not just put all of our eggs in one basket.
Will it ever go to a tissue culture plant like the blackberry business did, when they left all the other types of propagation? To go to a source that's being clean and then propagate from there?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. I mean, tissue culture might clean it up a little bit if you had tissue culture sources, but I don't know. I assume you probably could clean it up to some degree, but that brings in probably a lot of extra cost and other things of that nature too.
Having an acre that's going to be absolutely nothing that you spend $15,000 to get it there is a big.
Yeah, that's true too.
That's a big expense too.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That is true. But I don't know, is anybody doing tissue culture largely for strawberries? Are there any large production of tissue culture strawberries?
West Tech is.
West Tech.
Yeah, West Tech out of California is doing tissue culture.
Go ahead.
Yeah, West Tech out of California is doing tissue culture, and every year they produce their new set of plants. But I think that's the only nursery who does that.
Okay. All right. I think you got time up.
Yep, that's all we have time for, so one more.